Part 1. Meditation. It's not what you think. The range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. R.D. Laing. There is that in me. I do not know what it is, but I know it is in me. Walt Whitman. Meditation is not for the faint-hearted. It is difficult to speak of the timeless beauty and richness of the present moment when things are moving so fast. But the faster things move, the more important it is for us to dip into or even inhabit the timeless. Otherwise, we can lose touch with dimensions of our humanity that make all the difference between happiness and misery, between wisdom and folly, between well-being and the erosive turmoil in the mind, in the body, and in the world that we will be referring to as dis-ease. Because our discontent truly is a disease, even when it does not appear as such. Sometimes we colloquially refer to those kinds of feelings and conditions, to that dis-ease we feel so much of the time, as stress. It is usually painful. It weighs on us, and it always carries a feeling of underlying dissatisfaction. In 1979, I started a stress reduction clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center in Worcester, Massachusetts. Thinking back to that era almost 40 years ago, I asked myself, what stress? So much has our world changed since then, so much has the pace of life increased, and the vagaries and dangers of the world come to our doorstep as never before. If looking squarely at our personal situation and circumstances and finding novel and imaginative ways to work with them in the service of health and healing was important 40 years ago, it is infinitely more important and urgent now, inhabiting as we do a world that has been thrown into heightened chaos and speed in the unfolding of events, even as it has become far more interconnected and smaller. In such an exponentially accelerating and ever more disruptive era, it is more important and urgent than ever for us to learn to inhabit the timeless and draw upon it for solace and clear seeing. That has been from the start the very core of the curriculum of our stress reduction clinic, what is now known as MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. I am not speaking of some distant future in which, after years of striving, you would finally attain something, taste the timeless beauty of meditative awareness and all it offers, and ultimately lead a more effective and satisfying and peaceful life in some fantasy future that may or may not ever arrive. I'm speaking of accessing the timeless in this very moment, because it is always right under our noses, so to speak, and in doing so, to gain access to those dimensions of possibility that are presently hidden from us because we refuse to be present, because we are seduced, entrained, mesmerized, or frightened into the future and the past, carried along in the stream of events and the weather patterns of our own reactions and numbness, attending to, if not obsessing about, what we often unthinkingly dub urgent, while losing touch at the same time with what is actually important, supremely important, in fact vital for our own well-being, for our sanity, and for our very survival. We have made absorption in the future and in the past such an overriding habit that, much of the time, we have no awareness of the present moment at all. As a consequence, we may feel we have very little, if any, control over the ups and downs of our own lives and of our own minds. The opening sentence of the brochure in which we describe the mindfulness retreats and training programs that our institute, the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society, the CFM for short, offered for many years to business leaders read, "Meditation is not for the faint-hearted nor for those who routinely avoid the whispered longings of their own hearts." That sentence was very much there on purpose. Its aim was to immediately discourage from attending those who were not yet ready for the timeless, who wouldn't understand or even make room in their minds or hearts to give such an experience or understanding a chance. If they had come to one of those 5-day programs, chances are they would have found themselves fighting with their own mind the entire time, thinking the meditation practice was nonsense, pure torture, boring in the extreme, a waste of time. Chances are they would have been so caught up in their resisting and objecting that they might never have found a way to settle into the precious and preciously brief moments we have when we are able to get together to explore our actual moment-to-moment experience in such ways. And if people did show up at these retreats, we could assume that it was either because of that sentence or in spite of it. Either way, or so our strategizing went, there would be an implicit, if not intrepid, willingness on the part of those who did show up to explore the interior landscape of the mind and body and the realm of what the ancient Chinese Taoists and Chan masters called non-doing, the domain of true meditation, in which it looks as though nothing or nothing much is happening or being done, but at the same time, nothing important is left undone, and as a consequence, that mysterious energy of an open, aware non-doing can manifest in the world of doing in remarkable ways. Of course, we all mostly avoid the whispered longings of our own hearts as we are carried along in the stream of life's doings, especially if our attention is pulled in so many different directions and we become more and more distracted. And I am certainly not suggesting that meditation is always easy or pleasant. It's simple, but it certainly isn't always easy. It's not easy to string even a few moments together in which to practice formally on a regular basis in a very busy life. Never mind remembering that mindfulness is available to us, you might say informally, in any and every unfolding moment of our lives. But sometimes we can no longer ignore those intimations from our own hearts. And sometimes, somehow, we find ourselves pulled to show up at places we ordinarily wouldn't, mysteriously drawn to where we might have lived for a time as a child, or to the wilderness, or to a meditation retreat, or to a book or a class, or to a conversation that might offer that long-ignored side of ourselves a chance to open to the sunlight, to be seen and heard and felt and known and inhabited by ourselves, by our own heart's lifelong longing to meet itself. The adventure that the universe of mindfulness offers is one possible avenue into dimensions of your being that may have perhaps gone ignored or unattended or denied for too long. Mindfulness, as we will see, has a rich and textured capacity to influence the unfolding of our lives. By the same token, it has an equal capacity to influence the larger world within which we are seamlessly embedded, including our family, our work, the society as a whole, and how we see ourselves as a people, what I'm calling the body politic, and the body of the world, all of us together on this planet. And all this can come about through your own experience of the practice of mindfulness by virtue of that very embeddedness and the reciprocal relationships between inner and outer, between being and doing. For there is no question that we are seamlessly embedded in the web of life itself and within the web of what we might call mind, an invisible, intangible essence that allows for sentience and consciousness and the potential for awareness itself to transform ignorance into wisdom and discord into reconciliation and accord. Awareness offers a safe haven in which to restore ourselves and rest in a vital and dynamic harmony, tranquility, creativity, and joyfulness now, not in some far-off hoped-for future time when things are better or we've gotten things under control or have improved ourselves. Strange as it may sound, our capacity for mindfulness allows us to taste and embody that which we most deeply desire, that which most eludes us and which is, curiously, always ever so close, a greater stability and peace of mind, and all that accompanies it, in any and every moment available to us. In microcosm, peace is no farther than this very moment. In macrocosm, peace is something almost all of us collectively aspire to in one way or another, especially if it is accompanied by justice and recognition of an intrinsic diversity within our larger wholeness and of everybody's innate humanity and rights. Peace is something that we can bring about if we can actually learn to wake up a bit more as individuals and a lot more as a species. If we can learn to be fully what we actually already are, to reside in the inherent potential of what is possible for us being human. And as the adage goes, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. It is so for the outer landscape of the world. It is so for the inner landscape of the heart. And these are, in a profound way, not really two. Because mindfulness, which can be thought of as an open-hearted, moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness, is optimally cultivated through meditation rather than just through merely thinking about it and philosophizing. And because its most elaborate and complete articulation comes from the Buddhist tradition, in which mindfulness is often described as the heart of Buddhist meditation, I have chosen to say some things here and there as we go along about Buddhism and its relationship to the practice of mindfulness. I do this so that we might reap some understanding and some benefit from what this extraordinary tradition offers the world at this moment in history, based on its incubation on our planet in many different cultures over the past 2,600 years. The way I see it, Buddhism itself is not the point. You might think of the Buddha as a genius of his age, a great scientist, at least as towering a figure as Darwin or Einstein, who, as the Buddhist scholar Alan Wallace likes to put it, had no instruments other than his own mind at his disposal, and who sought to look deeply into the nature of birth and death and the seeming inevitability of suffering. In order to pursue his investigations, he first had to understand, develop, refine, and learn to calibrate and stabilize the instrument he was using for this purpose, namely his own mind, in the same way that laboratory scientists today have to continually develop, refine, calibrate, and stabilize the instruments that they employ to extend their senses, whether we're talking about giant optical or radio telescopes, electron microscopes, functional magnetic resonance imaging scanners, or positron emission tomography scanners. In the service of looking deeply into and exploring the nature of the universe and the vast array of interconnected phenomena that unfold within it, whether it be in the domain of physics and physical phenomena, chemistry, biology, psychology, or any other field of inquiry. To meet this challenge, the Buddha and those who followed in his footsteps took on exploring deep questions about the nature of the mind itself and about the nature of life. Their efforts at self-observation led to remarkable discoveries. They succeeded in accurately mapping a territory that is quintessentially human, having to do with aspects of the mind that we all have in common, independent of our particular thoughts, beliefs, and cultures. Both the methods they used and the fruits of those investigations are universal and have nothing to do with any isms, ideologies, religiosities, or belief systems. These discoveries are more akin to medical and scientific understandings, frameworks that can be examined by anyone anywhere and put to the test independently for oneself, which is what the Buddha suggested to his followers from the very beginning. Because I practice and teach mindfulness, I have the recurring experience that people frequently make the assumption that I am a Buddhist. When asked, I usually respond that I am not a Buddhist, although I do practice on retreat with Buddhist teachers from time to time and have great respect and love for different Buddhist traditions and practices. But I am a student of Buddhist meditation and a devoted one, not because I'm devoted to Buddhism per se, but because I have found its core teachings and practices to be so profound and so universally applicable, illuminating, and healing. I have found this to be the case in my own life over the past 50-plus years of ongoing practice, and I have found it to be the case as well in the lives of many others with whom I have had the privilege of working and practicing through the Center for Mindfulness and its global network of MBSR teachers. And I continue to be deeply touched and inspired by those teachers and non-teachers alike, Easterners and Westerners, who embody the wisdom and compassion inherent in these teachings and practices in their own lives. For me, mindfulness practice is really a love affair with what is most fundamental in life, a love affair with what is so, and with what we might call truth, which for me includes beauty, the unknown, and the possible, how things actually are, all embedded here in this very moment, for it is all already here, and at the same time everywhere, because here can be anywhere at all. Mindfulness is also always now, because as we have already touched on, and as we will touch on many times again, for us there simply is no other time. Here and now, everywhere and always gives us a lot of room for working together. That is, if you are interested and willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work of the timeless, the work of non-doing, the work of awareness embodied in your own life as it is always unfolding moment by moment. It is indeed the work of no time at all and the work of a lifetime. No one culture and no one art form has a monopoly on either truth or beauty, writ either large or small. But for the particular exploration we will be undertaking together in these pages and in our lives, I find it is both useful and illuminating to draw upon the work of those special people on our planet who devote themselves to the language of the mind and the heart that we call poetry. Our greatest poets engage in deep interior explorations of the mind and of words and of the intimate relationship between inner and outer landscapes, just as do the greatest yogis and teachers in the meditative traditions. In fact, it is not uncommon in the meditative traditions for moments of illumination and insight to be expressed through poetry. Both yogis and poets are intrepid explorers of what is so and articulate guardians of the possible. The lenses that great poetry holds up for us, as with all authentic art, have the potential to enhance our seeing, and even more importantly, our ability to feel the poignancy and relevance of our own situations, our own psyches, and our own lives, in ways that help us to understand where the meditation practice may be asking us to look and to see, what it is asking us to open to, and above all, what it is making possible for us to feel and to know. Poetry emanates from all the cultures and traditions of this planet. One might say that our poets are the keepers of the conscience and the soul of our humanity, and have been through all the ages. They speak many aspects of a truth worth attending to and contemplating. North American, Central American, South American, Chinese, Japanese, European, Turkish, Persian, Indian, or African, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, Hindu, or Jain, animist or classical, women and men, ancients and moderns, gay or straight, trans or queer, all might, under the right circumstances, when we are most open and available to ourselves, bestow a mysterious gift upon us, worth exploring, savoring, and cherishing. They give us fresh lenses with which to see and come to know ourselves across the span of cultures and of time, offering something more fundamental, something more human than the expected or the already known. The view through such lenses may not always be comforting. At times it might be downright disturbing and perturbing. And perhaps those are the poems that we most need to linger with, because they reveal the ever-changing full spectrum of light and shadow that plays across the screens of our own minds and moves within the subterranean currents of our own hearts. In their best moments, poets articulate the inexpressible, and in such moments, by some mysterious grace bestowed by muse and heart, are transfigured into masters of words beyond words, the unspeakable, wrought and fashioned and pointed to, brought to life in part by our own participation in them. Poems are animated when we come to them and let them come to us, in that moment of reading or hearing when we hang with all our sensibilities and intelligences on every word, every event or moment evoked, every breath drawn to evoke it, every image invoked with vibrancy and art, carrying us beyond artifice back to ourselves and what is actually so. To that end, we will pause now and again on our journey together through the 4 of these books to bathe in these waters of clarity and of anguish, and so be bathed in the ineluctable efforts of humanity yearning to know itself, reminding itself of what it does know, sometimes even succeeding, and in the deeply friendly and ultimately hugely generous and compassionate act, although hardly ever undertaken for that purpose, pointing out possible ways of deepening our living and our seeing and our feeling, and perhaps thereby appreciating more and even celebrating who and what we are and might become. My heart rouses, thinking to bring you news of something that concerns you and concerns many men. Look at what passes for the new. You will not find it there but in despised poems. It is difficult to get the new from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. William Carlos Williams. Outside, the freezing desert night. This other night grows warm, kindling. Let the landscape be covered with thorny crust. We have a soft garden in here. The continents blasted, cities and towns, everything becomes a scorched, blackened ball. The news we hear is full of grief for that future, but the real news inside here is there's no news at all. Rumi. Witnessing Hippocratic Integrity. I am lying on the carpeted floor of the spacious and spanking new faculty conference room at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center with a group of about 15 patients in the dwindling light of a late September afternoon in 1979. This is the first class in the first cycle of the Stress Reduction and Relaxation Program, later to become known as the Stress Reduction Clinic, or MBSR for Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Clinic, that has just been launched here. I am midway through guiding us in an extended lying down meditation known as the body scan. We are all lying on our backs on brand new cloth-encased foam mats of various bright colors, clustered together at one end of the room so as to better hear my instructions. In the middle of a long stretch of silence, the door of the room suddenly opens, and a group of about 30 people in long white coats enters. In the lead is a tall and stately gentleman. He strides over to where I am lying and gazes first down upon me, stretched out on the floor in a black t-shirt and black karate pants, barefoot, and then around the room, a quizzical and bemused look on his face. He looks down at me again, and after a long pause finally says, "What is going on here?" I remain lying down, and so does the rest of the class, corpse-like on their colorful mats, their attention suspended somewhere between their feet where we had started out and the top of the head where we were headed, with all the white coats silently looming in the shadows behind this commanding presence. "This is the hospital's new stress reduction program," I reply, still lying there, wondering to myself what on earth was going on. He responded, "Well, this is a special joint meeting of the surgical faculty with the faculty of all our affiliate hospitals, and we specifically had this conference room reserved for this purpose for some time." At this point, I stand up. My head comes up to about his shoulder. I introduce myself and say, I can't imagine how this conflict came about. I double-checked with the scheduling office to make sure we had the room reserved for our Wednesday afternoon classes for the next 10 weeks for this time slot, from 4 to 6 p.m. He looked me up and down, towering over me in his long white coat, with his name embroidered in blue on the front, H. Brownell Wheeler, M.D., Chief of Surgery. He had never seen me before, and had certainly not heard of this new program. We must have looked a sight, with our shoes and socks off, many in sweats and workout clothes, lying on the floor of the faculty conference room. Here was one of the most powerful people in the medical center, with the clock ticking on his busy schedule and a special meeting to facilitate, encountering something completely unexpected, and on the face of it, bizarre in the extreme, led by someone with virtually no standing in the medical center. He looked around one more time at all the bodies on the floor, some by this time propped up on the elbows to take in what was going on, and then he asked one question. "Are these our patients?" he inquired, gazing around at the bodies on the floor. "Yes," I replied, "they are." "Then we will find someplace else to hold our meeting," he said, and he turned around and led the entire group out of the room. I thanked him, closed the door behind them, and got back on the floor to resume our work. That was my introduction to Brownie Wheeler. I knew in that moment that I was going to enjoy working at that medical center. Years later, after Brownie and I had become friends, I reminded him of that episode and told him how impressed I had been at his uncompromising respect for the hospital's patients. Characteristically, he didn't think it a big deal. There was just no compromising on the principle that patients come first no matter what. By that time, I knew that he himself practiced meditation and was deeply appreciative of the power of the mind-body connection and its potential to transform medicine. He was a staunch supporter of the Stress Reduction Clinic for more than 2 decades. Then, having stepped down as chief of surgery, he became a leader in the movement to bring dignity and kindness to the process of dying, before succumbing years later to Parkinson's disease. At the request of his daughter, we reconnected by phone, with me doing the talking for both of us a few days before he died. That he didn't use his power and authority to dominate the situation on that late afternoon in the prime of his life and of his power in the medical center left me knowing that I had just witnessed and become the beneficiary of something all too rare in our society, embodied wisdom and compassion. The respect he showed the patients on that day was exactly what the meditation practice we were doing when the door to the conference room opened was attempting to nourish, a deep and non-judging acceptance of ourselves and the cultivation of our own transformative and healing possibilities. Dr. Wheeler's gracious gesture that afternoon augured well for honoring the ancient Hippocratic principles of medicine, so sorely needed in this world in so many ways, in more than merely fine words. No fine words were uttered, and nothing was left unsaid. Meditation is everywhere. Picture this: medical patients meditating and doing yoga in hospitals and medical centers around the country and around the world at the urging of their doctors. Sometimes it's even the doctors who are doing the teaching. Sometimes doctors are taking the program and meditating shoulder to shoulder along with the patients. Andries Kruse, a prominent vascular surgeon in Oslo, who had been practicing meditation for 30 years and attending Vipassana retreats in India periodically, came to California to participate in a 7-day retreat for health professionals wanting to train in MBSR. Shortly after returning home, he decided to cut back on his surgical practice and use the time he freed up to teach meditation to colleagues and patients in Scandinavia, a passion he had harbored for years. He then wrote a popular book about mindfulness-based stress reduction in Norwegian, which became a bestseller in Norway and Sweden. He is still at it more than a decade later. Harold Noodleman, a surgeon from El Camino Hospital in Mountain View, California, called one day. He introduced himself as having melanoma and said he feared he did not have long to live. He said he was familiar with meditation and had found it to be personally life-changing. After coming across my book, Full Catastrophe Living, he recounted, he realized that we had already found a way to do what he had been dreaming of for quite some time, namely to bring meditation into mainstream medicine. He said he wanted to facilitate that happening in his hospital in whatever time he had left. A month later, he brought a team of doctors and administrators to visit. Upon returning home, they set up an MBSR program led by a superb mindfulness teacher, Bob Stahl, who brought in other wonderful teachers as the program grew. It is still going more than 20 years later. Howard never bothered to tell me that he was the president of the board of a group seeking to build a mindfulness meditation retreat center in the Bay Area, which ultimately became the Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Woodacre, California. He died within a year of his visit. Brownie Wheeler, to whom I had introduced him during his group's visit with us, delivered the inaugural Howard Noodleman Memorial Lecture at El Camino Hospital later that year. El Camino is now one of numerous hospitals, medical centers, and clinics in the San Francisco Bay Area that are offering MBSR, including at the time of writing, many within the Kaiser Permanente system in Northern California. Kaiser even offers mindfulness training for its physicians and staff, as well as for its patients. MBSR programs are flourishing from Seattle to Miami, from Worcester, Massachusetts, where it began, to San Diego, California, from Whitehorse, Yukon Territory, to Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Halifax, from Beijing and Shanghai to Hong Kong and Taiwan, from England and Wales to pretty much all of Europe, from Mexico to Colombia to Argentina. There are programs in Cape Town, South Africa, and in Australia and New Zealand. There are long-standing MBSR programs at the medical centers of Duke, Stanford, the University of Wisconsin, the University of Virginia, Jefferson Medical College, and at other prominent medical centers across the country. Increasing numbers of scientists are now conducting clinical studies on the applications of mindfulness in both medicine and psychology. In the early 2000s, inspired by and modeled on MBSR, 3 cognitive therapists and researchers developed MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. MBCT has been shown through numerous clinical trials to dramatically reduce the rate of relapse in people suffering with major depressive disorder. MBCT was also shown to be at least as effective as antidepressant therapy itself for preventing relapse. This program has generated an enormous amount of interest in clinical psychology and prompted new generations of psychologists and psychotherapists to take up the practice of mindfulness meditation in their own lives and apply it in their clinical work and research. 40 years ago, it was virtually inconceivable that meditation and yoga would find any legitimate role, no less widespread acceptance in academic medical centers and hospitals. Now it is considered normal. It is certainly not thought of as alternative medicine. Rather, it's just another element of the practice of good medicine. Increasingly, programs in mindfulness are now available for medical students and for hospital staff, both, unfortunately, under high stress. There are even programs in some hospitals that teach meditation to patients in the bone marrow transplant unit at the very high-tech, invasive end of the medical treatment spectrum. These were pioneered by my colleague in the stress reduction clinic, Alana Rosenbaum, who underwent a bone marrow transplant herself when she was diagnosed with lymphoma, and so amazed the staff and physicians on the unit with the quality of her being, given that the complications she experienced following the treatment took her to death's door, that many wanted to take the program and learn to practice mindfulness for themselves and to offer it to their patients while they were on the unit. There are MBSR programs for inner-city residents and the homeless. There are MBSR programs in the United States taught entirely in Spanish. There are mindfulness programs for pain patients, for cancer patients, and for cardiac patients. Now there is MBCP, Mindfulness-Based Childbirth and Parenting, developed by MBSR teacher and midwife Nancy Bardicke for expectant parents, based at the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine at UCSF. Many patients don't wait for their doctors to suggest MBSR and other mindfulness-based programs anymore. These days they ask for it or just show up on their own. Mindfulness meditation is also being taught in law firms and has at times been offered to law students at Yale, Columbia, Harvard, Missouri, Gainesville, and elsewhere. My colleague Rhonda McGee, a professor of law at San Francisco University, has developed robust mindfulness-based courses for lawyers and law students that are also aimed at minimizing social identity-based bias. A pioneering symposium on mindfulness in the law and alternative dispute resolution took place at Harvard in 2002, and the papers presented were published in an issue of the Harvard Negotiation Law Review that same year. There is a whole movement now within the legal profession where lawyers themselves are teaching yoga and meditation in prominent law firms. One senior partner, all dressed up in suit and tie, was featured recently on the cover of the Boston Globe Sunday magazine doing the tree pose, smiling in bare feet, for an article on the new, kinder, gentler lawyer. What is going on? As mentioned, business leaders and now increasingly tech leaders attend rigorous 5-day retreats that start at 6 o'clock each morning and go late into the evening. Their motivation? To change the world and regulate their own stress levels and to bring greater awareness to the life of business and the business of life. Many pioneering schools and school systems, such as in Flint, Michigan, are instituting mindfulness programs at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. There are groups like Mindful Schools and Mindfulness in Schools, and Daniel Rechtschaffen's Mindful Education online training for teachers, all of whom are doing remarkable work and seeing profound results in both K-12 classroom teachers and their students. In the domain of sport, during Phil Jackson's era as coach of the Chicago Bulls, the team trained in and practiced mindfulness under the guidance of George Mumford, who headed up our prison project at the Center for Mindfulness and also co-founded our inner city MBSR clinic. When Jackson moved to Los Angeles to coach the Lakers, they too practiced mindfulness. Both teams were NBA champions, the Bulls 6 times, 3 with George, and the Lakers 5 times, all with George. Now it is the champion Golden State Warriors who have adopted mindfulness as part of their approach to the game, encouraged by their head coach, Steve Kerr, who was exposed to it when he was on the championship Bulls teams. Prisons offer programs in meditation to inmates and staff alike, not only in this country, but in places like the UK and India. One summer, I had the occasion to co-lead with the Alaskan fisherman Zen practitioner and now MBSR teacher Kurt Holting of Inside Passages a meditation retreat for environmental activists that included, in addition to sitting meditation, yoga, and mindful walking, a good deal of mindful kayaking. The retreat took place on isolated outer islands in the vast Tebenkoff Bay wilderness area in southeast Alaska, reached by float plane. When we got back to town after 8 days in the wilderness, the cover story of Time magazine, that was August 4th, 2003, was on meditation. The very fact that it was a cover story featuring detailed descriptions of the effects of meditation on the brain and on health was a bellwether of how meditation has entered and has been embraced by the mainstream of our culture. It is no longer a marginal engagement on the part of the very few or the easily dismissed as crazy. There was another Time cover story on mindfulness and MBSR in 2014. By then it was being touted as the mindful revolution. Indeed, meditation centers are sprouting up everywhere, offering retreats and classes and workshops, and even stopping in on the way to work sittings, and more people are coming to them to learn and to practice together. Yoga has never been more popular and is passionately being taken up by children and by seniors and everybody in between. And now there are impressive online mindfulness summits right at your fingertips, with many skilled and experienced presenters, as well as excellent podcasts that help whoever is interested to get more deeply into mindfulness from different perspectives, including neuroscience, medicine, and healthcare and psychology. What on earth is going on? You might say that we are in the early stages of waking up as a culture to the potential of deep intimacy with interiority, to the power of cultivating awareness and learning to inhabit stillness and silence. We are beginning to realize the power of the present moment to bring us greater clarity and insight, greater emotional stability and wisdom, and embodied wisdom that we can carry into the world, into our families and our work, into society more broadly, and into the domain of the global. In a word, meditation is no longer something foreign and exotic to our culture. It is now as American as anything else, or English, or French, or Italian, or South American. It has arrived. And none too soon either, given the state of the world and the huge forces impinging on our lives. It may just be, and I like to think it is, the beginning of a renaissance of wakefulness, compassion, and wisdom, expressing itself globally through an infinite number of different forms. But again, please keep one thing in mind. It's not what you think. Original moments. There was a time from the early to late 70s when I studied with a Korean Zen master named Sung San. His name translates literally as High Mountain, the name of the mountain in China where the sixth Zen patriarch, Huineng, is said to have attained enlightenment. We called him Son Sanim, which I only much later found out means honored Zen teacher. I don't think any of us actually knew what it meant at the time. It was just his name. He had come over from Korea and somehow wound up in Providence, Rhode Island, where some Brown University students discovered him, improbably, but we came to learn that pretty much everything with him was improbable, repairing washing machines in a small shop owned by some fellow Koreans. These students organized an informal group around him to find out what this guy was all about and had to offer. Those small informal gatherings eventually gave birth to the Providence Zen Center, and from there, in the decades that followed, to many other centers around the world that supported Son Sanim's teachings. I heard about him from a student of mine at Brandeis and went down to Providence one day to check him out. There was something about Son Sanim that was utterly fascinating. First, he was a Zen master, whatever that was, who was repairing washing machines and seemingly very happy doing so. He had a perfectly round face that was disarmingly open and winsome. He was utterly present, utterly himself, no airs, no conceit. His head was completely shaved. He called hair ignorance grass and said that for monks it had to be cut regularly. He wore funny, thin, white rubber slip-on shoes that looked like little boats. Korean monks don't wear leather because it comes from animals. And in the early days mostly hung out in his underwear, although when he taught he wore long gray robes and a simple brown keisha, a flat square of material sewn from many different pieces of cloth that hung around his neck and rested on his chest symbolical in Zen of the tattered robes of the first Zen practitioners in China. He also had fancier and more colorful outfits for special occasions and ceremonies, which he performed for the local Korean Buddhist community. He had an unusual way of speaking, in part because he didn't know many words in English at first, and in part because American grammar eluded him completely. And so he spoke in a kind of broken English Korean that got his points across in just unbelievable ways that entered the mind of the listener with a breathtaking freshness, because our minds had never heard anything like that, and so couldn't process it in the ordinary way we usually do with what is heard. As tends to happen in such circumstances, many of his students fell into talking among themselves in the same way in broken English, saying things to each other like, "Just go straight, don't check your mind," and "The arrow is already downtown," and "Put it down, just put it down," and "You already understand." Things like that made sense to them but sounded insane to anybody else. Sansanim was maybe 5 feet 10 inches tall, not thin but not rotund either. Perhaps corpulent describes him best. He seemed ageless but was probably in his mid-40s. He was well known and highly respected in Korea, it was said, but had apparently chosen to come to America and bring his teachings to where the action was in those days. American youth in the early 70s certainly had a lot of energy and enthusiasm for Eastern meditative traditions, and he was part of a large wave of Asian meditation teachers who came to America in the 60s and 70s. If you want to get a flavor for his verbatim teachings in those days, you can read Dropping Ashes on the Buddha by Stephen Mitchell. Sansanim would often begin a public talk by taking the Zen stick he usually had within reach, fashioned from a gnarled and twisted, highly polished burl of demented tree branch, which he sometimes leaned his chin on as he peered out at the audience, and holding it up in the air horizontally above his head, bellow, "Do you see this?" Long silence. Puzzled looks. Then he would bang it straight down on the floor or on the table in front of him. It would make a loud thwack. "Do you hear this?" Long silence. More puzzled looks. Then he would begin his talk. Often he didn't explain that opening gambit and what it was all about, but the message slowly became clear, maybe only after seeing him do this time and time again. No need to make things complicated where Zen or meditation or mindfulness are concerned. Meditation is not aimed at developing a fine philosophy of life or mind. It's not about thinking at all. It's about keeping things simple. Right now, in this moment, do you see? Do you hear? This seeing, this hearing, when unadorned, is the recovery of original mind, free from all concepts, including original mind. And it is already here, it is already ours, indeed, it is impossible to lose. If you do see the stick, who's seeing? If you do hear the hit, who is hearing? In the initial moment of seeing, there's just the seeing before thinking sets in and the mind secretes thoughts like, "I wonder what he means. Of course I see the stick. That's quite a stick. I don't think I ever saw a stick like that. I wonder where he got it. Maybe Korea. It would be nice to have a stick like that. I get what he's doing with that stick. I wonder if anybody else does. This is kind of cool. Wow, meditation is pretty far out. I could really get with this. I wonder what I would look like in those robes." Or, with the hearing of the loud bang, "This is a peculiar way to start a talk. Of course I hear the sound. Does he think we're deaf? Did he actually hit that table? He must have left quite a mark on it. That was some wallop. How could he do that? Doesn't he know that it's somebody's property? Doesn't he care? What kind of a person is he, anyway?" That was the whole point. Do you see? We hardly ever just see. Do you hear? We hardly ever just hear. Thoughts, interpretations, and emotions pour in so quickly following any and every experience, and as expectations even before the experience arises, that we can hardly say that we were there at all for the original moment of seeing, the original moment of hearing. If we were, it would be here and not there. Instead, we see our concepts rather than the stick. We hear our concepts rather than the thwack. We evaluate, we judge, we digress, we categorize, we react emotionally. and so quickly that the moment of pure seeing, the moment of pure hearing, is lost. For that moment, at least, you could say that we have lost our minds and have taken leave of our senses. Of course, such moments of unawareness color what comes next, so there's a tendency to stay lost, to fall into automatic patterns of thinking and feeling for long stretches of time and not even know it. So when Sansinim asked, "Do you see this? Do you hear this?" it was not as trivial as it might have appeared to be at first blush. He was inviting us to wake up from the dream of our self-absorption and our endless spinning out of stories that distance us from what is actually happening in these moments that add up to what we call our life. Odysseus and the blind seer. We sometimes say, "Come to your senses," to enjoin somebody to wake up to how things actually are. Usually, though, you may have noticed, people don't magically get sensible just because we're imploring them to, nor do we when we implore ourselves. Their whole orientation, to themselves, to the situation, and everything else, may need an overhaul, sometimes a drastic one. How to go about that? Sometimes it takes a health crisis to wake us up, if it doesn't kill us first. We say he has taken leave of his senses to mean he's no longer in touch with reality. Most of the time, it's not so easy to get back in touch. Where would one even start when you are already so off? And what if the whole society or the whole world has taken leave of its senses, so that everybody is focusing on some aspect of the elephant, but nobody is apprehending the whole of it? Meanwhile, what we thought was an elephant is morphing into something more like a monster running amok, and we are stuck, unwilling to perceive and name what is so, much like the spectator citizens in the realm of the duped emperor with his new set of invisible clothes. The fact of the matter is that it is not so easy to come to our senses without practice. And as a rule, we are colossally out of practice. We are out of shape when it comes to our senses. We are out of shape when it comes to recognizing our relationship with those aspects of body and mind that partake of the senses, are coextensive with the senses, are informed by the senses, and are shaped by them. In other words, we are colossally out of shape when it comes to perception and awareness, whether oriented outwardly or inwardly or both. We get back in shape by exercising our faculties for paying attention over and over again, just like a muscle. And what grows stronger and more robust and flexible through such workouts, often in the face of considerable resistance from within our own mind, is a lot more interesting than, say, a bicep. Most of the time, our senses, including, of course, our minds, are playing tricks on us, just from force of habit and the fact that the senses are not passive, but require coherent active assessment and interpretation from various regions of the brain. We see, but we are scantily aware of seeing as relationship, the relationship between our capacity to see and what is available to be seen. We believe what we think is in front of us, but that experience is actually filtered through our various unconscious thought constructs and the mysterious way that we seem to be alive inside a world that we can take in through the eyes. So we see some things, but at the same time we may not see what is most important or most relevant for our unfolding life. We see habitually, which means that we see in very limited ways, or we don't see at all, even sometimes what is right under our noses and in front of our very eyes. We see on automatic pilot, taking the miracle of seeing for granted, until it is merely part of the unacknowledged background within which we go about our business. We can have children and go for years without really seeing them, because we are only seeing our thoughts about them colored by our expectations or our fears. The same can be true for any and all of our relationships. We live within the natural world, but much of the time we don't notice it either, missing the way sunlight might be reflecting off of one particular leaf, or how surrounded we are in the city by amazingly misshapen reflections in windows and windshields. Nor do we sense, as a rule, that we are being seen and sensed by others, including wildlife in the landscape. You'd know it better spending a night in the rainforest, and in ways that might very much diverge from our own view of ourselves. Perhaps such pervasive and endemic blindness on our part as human beings is one reason Homer, at the very dawn of the Western literary tradition, crafting his orally transmitted tale circa 800 BCE in the middle of the Odyssey, has Odysseus seek out Tiresias on the border of Hades to learn his fate and what he must do to return safely home. For Tiresias is a blind seer, and whenever a blind seer makes an appearance, you know things are about to get more interesting and more real. Homer seems to be telling us that real seeing goes way beyond having functional eyes. In fact, functional eyes can be an impediment to finding one's way. We must learn how to see beyond our own habitual and characterological blindnesses, in Odysseus's case, the product of his arrogance and wiliness, which were both his strength and his undoing, and therefore an incomparable gift to reckon with and learn from. Not only do we not see what is here, often we see what's not here. How the eye fabricates. The mind makes things up. In part, this is due to our wildly creative imagination. In part, it's the way our nervous system is wired up. Is there a triangle in the figure in the bonus material known as the Kanitsa triangle or not? Sansanim would say, if you say there is, I will hit you with his Zen stick 30 times. He didn't really, but in the old days in China, they did. If you say there isn't, I will hit you 30 times. What can you do? He didn't use Kanitsa triangles, but any object that was handy. If you say this isn't a stick, a glass, a watch, a rock, I will hit you. What can you do? It sure taught us not to be attached to form or emptiness, or at least not to show it. But in spite of ourselves, show it we did much of the time and just blundered through, hoping somehow to learn and grow in the process from the caring that went into his apparent lack of caring, if from nothing else. We all know that when it comes to perceiving through our eyes, we see certain things but not others, even when they're staring us right in the face. And we can be easily conditioned to see in certain ways and prevented from seeing in others. Sleight-of-hand magicians make use of this selectivity in our observing all the time. Their art just baffles and delights the mind by skillfully diverting our attention and wreaking havoc with the senses. More universally, people in different cultures can see the same event very differently depending on their belief systems and orientation. They are seeing through different mind lenses and therefore seeing different realities. None are entirely true. Most are only true to a degree. Were Americans the liberators of Iraq or its oppressors? Be careful what you say. How attached are we to one view only, one that may be only partially true, only true to a degree? We are all wont at times to fall mindlessly into black and white thinking, going for the absolutes. It makes us feel better, more secure, but it is also hugely blinding. This is good, that is bad. This is right, that is wrong. We are strong, they are weak. We are smart, they are not. She's a peach, he's a pain. I'm a wreck, they are nuts. He'll never grow out of it. She's so insensitive. I'll never be able to do this. It's unstoppable. All these statements are thoughts, and they tend to be view-distorting and limiting even if they're partly true. Because for the most part, things in the real world are only true to a degree. There is no such thing as a tall person. One is only tall to a degree. No such thing as a smart person. One is only smart to a degree. But when we fall into such thinking, if we examine it in the light of a larger awareness, we find it tends to be rigid, confining, and inevitably, at least partly, wrong. Thus, our black and white, either-or seeing and thinking leads rapidly to fixed and limiting judgments, often arrived at reflexively, automatically, without reflection, often thwarting our ability to steer our way home through the vagaries of life. Discernment, on the other hand, as differentiated from judging, leads us to see, hear, feel, perceive infinite shades of nuance, shades of gray between all white and all black, all good and all bad. And this is what we might call wise discerning. This wise discerning allows us to see and navigate through different openings, whereas our quick reaction judgments put us at risk for not seeing such openings at all and missing the full spectrum of the real, and thus lead us to automatically and unwittingly limit the possible. There is a whole field of mathematics and engineering based on this complex fractal patterning in the world in between all one way and all another way. It's called fuzzy math. The funny thing is, the more you start paying attention to the degrees of things, the clearer the mind gets, not the fuzzier. It will be helpful as we move more and more into the exploration of mindfulness to keep this in mind. Bart Kosko of the University of Southern California, in his book Fuzzy Thinking, points out that the world of 0 and 1, black and white, is the world as articulated by Aristotle, who parenthetically also described the 5 senses in writing for the first time in Western culture. All the shades of gray, as well as 0 and 1, are the world as articulated by the Buddha. So which model of the world is correct? Be careful. Apples can be red, green, or yellow, but if you look closely, they are only red or green or yellow to a degree. Sometimes there are bigger or smaller splotches or specks of the other colors mixed in. No natural apple is entirely red or green or yellow. The meditation teacher Joseph Goldstein recounts the story of the elementary school teacher who asked her class, "What color is this, children?" as she held up an apple. Many children said red, some said yellow, and some said green, but one boy said white. "White," said the teacher. "Why are you saying white? You can plainly see it's not white." At which point the boy comes up to the desk, takes a bite out of it, and holds it up for the teacher and the class to see. Goldstein is also fond of pointing out that there is no Big Dipper in the sky, just the appearance of a Big Dipper from our particular angle on those stars. But it sure looks like a Big Dipper when you look up on a dark night. And this non-Big Dipper still helps us locate the North Star and navigate by it. In the bonus PDF, you will find a figure of a woman. Take a look at it. Some people see an old woman and only an old woman. Others see a young woman and only a young woman. Which is it? If prior to showing that image, I flash the pictures that you also have in your bonus PDF, the one on the left, for even 5 seconds to half a large audience while the other half have their eyes closed, those people are much more likely to see a young woman in the ambiguous drawing than the other half who were flashed the picture on the right. They, in contrast, are much more likely to see an old woman. Once the pattern is set by this kind of priming, it is very hard for some people to see the other one, even after staring at it for a long time, unless they are shown both of those unambiguous sketches simultaneously. And then there is the enchanting story from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's marvelous fantasy, Le Petit Prince. Once, when I was 6, I saw a magnificent picture in a book about the jungle called True Stories. It showed a boa constrictor swallowing a wild beast. In the book it said, boa constrictors swallow their prey whole without chewing. Afterwards, they're no longer able to move and they sleep during the 6 months of their digestion. In those days, I thought a lot about jungle adventures, and eventually I managed to make a first drawing using a colored pencil. My drawing number 1 looked like this. I showed the grown-ups my masterpiece and I asked them if my drawing scared them. And they answered, "Why be scared by a hat?" My drawing was not a picture of a hat. It was a picture of a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. Then I drew the inside of the boa constrictor so the grown-ups could understand. They always need explanations. My drawing number 2 looked like this. The grown-ups advised me to put away my drawings of boa constrictors, outside or inside, and apply myself instead to geography, history, arithmetic, and grammar. That is why I abandoned at the age of 6 a magnificent career as an artist. I had been discouraged by the failure of my drawing number 1 and of my drawing number 2. Grown-ups never understand anything by themselves, and it is exhausting for children to have to provide explanations over and over again. So to come to our senses, perhaps we will need to develop and learn to trust our innate capacity to see beneath the surface of appearances to more fundamental dimensions of reality, as Tiresias, who was blind yet could see what was important, was embodying for Odysseus, who was not literally blind but couldn't discern what he most needed to see and know. Perhaps these new dimensions that only seem hidden from us can help us wake up to the full spectrum of our experience of the world and our potential to understand ourselves and find ways to be and to be of use that nourish both ourselves and the world, and that call forth from us what is deepest and best in ourselves and most human. My inside, listen to me. The greatest spirit, the teacher, is near. Wake up! Wake up! Run to his feet. He is standing close to your head right now. You have slept for millions and millions of years. Why not wake up this morning? Kabir. No attachments. There's a joke making the rounds that goes like this. Have you heard the one about the Buddhist vacuum cleaner? Are you kidding? What on earth is a Buddhist vacuum cleaner? You know, no attachments. The fact that people get this at all suggests that the core message of Buddhist meditation has found its way into the collective psyche of our culture. From the perspective of the era of my childhood in the 1940s and 50s, this cultural mind enlargement would have been highly improbable, even inconceivable. Carl Jung remarked as much in commenting about the potential difficulty for the Western mind to understand Zen, even though he himself had the highest respect for its aims and methods. Nevertheless, the shift has already occurred, and maybe Jung's abiding interest in it in an earlier era was emblematical of what is unfolding now, as well as instrumental. Still, he would have been astonished by how deeply mindfulness and Dharma wisdom have penetrated the mainstream world. The historian Arnold Toynbee is said to have commented that the coming of Buddhism to the West would be seen in time as the single most important historical event of the 20th century. That is a staggering assertion given all the remarkable events of that 100 years, including all the untold suffering that humans inflicted upon each other. Whether he was correct or not remains to be seen. It will probably require the perspective of at least another 100 years or so to even venture an informed assessment, but something is clearly happening on this front. In any event, nowadays people get the vacuum cleaner joke, and many others that find their way into the New Yorker and such places in the form of cartoons about meditation. Here's one. Two monks in robes who have obviously just finished a period of sitting meditation. One turns to the other, and the caption reads, "Are you not thinking what I'm not thinking?" The culture is catching a certain drift about meditation, and it is hardly limited to highbrow culture. We find it in bubblegum comics, movies, and advertisements on subway walls, magazines and newspapers. Inner Peace is now used to sell just about everything from spa vacations to new cars to perfume to bank accounts. No one is saying this is a good thing, but it does indicate that something is shifting as we become more aware on some level of the promise and the practical reality of such pursuits, and of course, of our capacity to exploit just about anything for the sake of marketing a product. In one bubblegum comic given to me years ago by a young patient, the sequence of pictures is accompanied by the following dialogue. From the text, you can imagine for yourself what the pictures might be. "What are you up to, Mort?" "I'm practicing meditation. After a few minutes, my mind is completely blank." "Gee, and I thought he was born that way." That meditation is about making the mind go blank is a complete misunderstanding of meditation. Even so, whatever people construe it to be, meditation is out there in Western culture as never before. For years, the Dalai Lama's face peered down from huge billboards courtesy of Apple Computer. I go to my local Staples to buy office supplies, and there is his book, The Art of Happiness, in its own display, in the business section no less. Something profound has happened over the past 40 years, and the seeds of it are now sprouting all over the place. It could be called the coming of Dharma to the West. If the word Dharma is unfamiliar to you, or its meaning opaque at the moment, we will be exploring it in some detail in Part 2. For now, suffice it to say that it can be thought of as both the formal teachings of the Buddha, when it's with a capital D, and also a universal ethical intrinsic lawfulness describing the way things are and the nature of the mind that perceives and knows, when it's written with a small d. The Buddha once said that the core message of all his teachings, and he taught continually for over 45 years, could be summed up in one sentence. On the off chance that that might be the case, it might not be a bad idea to commit that sentence to memory. You never know when it might come in handy, when it might make sense to you even though in the moment before it really didn't. That sentence is, nothing is to be clung to as I, me, or mine. In other words, no attachments, especially to the fixed idea of yourself and who you are. It is a hard message to swallow at first blush because it brings into question everything that we think we are, which for the most part seems to come from what we identify with. Our bodies, our thoughts, our feelings, our relationships, our values, our work, our expectations of what is supposed to happen and how things are supposed to work out for me in order for me to be happy, our stories of where we came from and where we're going and of who we are. But let's not react quite so quickly, even though at first blush the Buddha's counsel may feel more than a little scary or even stupid or irrelevant. For the operative word here is clinging. It is important to understand what is meant by clinging, so we don't misinterpret this injunction as a disavowal of all we hold dear, when in fact it is an invitation to come into greater touch and into a direct living contact with everybody we hold dear to our hearts and everything that is most important to our well-being as a whole person, body, mind, soul, and spirit, whatever language you want to use. That includes what is difficult to handle or come to terms with, the stress and the anguish of the human condition itself when it rears up in our lives, as it is apt to do sooner or later in one way or another. It is saying that it is our attachment to the thoughts we have of who we are that may be the impediment to living life fully, and a stubborn obstacle to any realization of who and what we actually are and of what is important and possible. It may be that in clinging to our self-referential ways of seeing and being, to the parts of speech we call the personal pronouns, I, me, and mine, we sustain the unexamined habit of grasping and clinging to what is not fundamental, all the while missing or forgetting what is. The origin of shoes, a tale. There is an ancient story of how shoes came to be invented. Once upon a time, a long time ago, it seems, there was a princess who, while walking one day, stubbed her toe on a root sticking out in the path. Vexed, she went to the prime minister and insisted that he draw up an edict declaring that the entire kingdom should be paved in leather so that no one would ever have to suffer from stubbing a toe again. Now, the prime minister knew that the king always wanted to please his daughter in any and every way, and so might be appealed to actually cover the kingdom in leather, which, while it might solve that problem and make the princess happy, and save everybody from the indignity of stubbed toes, would be sorely problematic in many ways, to say nothing of expensive. Thinking quickly, I won't say on his feet, the prime minister responded, "I have it. Instead of covering the whole kingdom in leather, Your Highness, why don't we craft pieces of leather shaped to your feet and attach them in some suitable way? Then, wherever you go, your feet will still have protection at the point of contact with the ground, and we will not have to incur such a large expense and forego the sweetness of the earth." The princess was well pleased with this suggestion, and so shoes came into the world and much folly was averted. I find this story quite enchanting. It reveals several profound insights about our minds in the guise of a simple children's tale. First, things happen to us that generate vexations and aversion, two words Buddhists in some traditions love to use, and which I think, in spite of their quaint ring, really do accurately describe our emotions when things don't go our way. We stub our toe, and we don't like it. Right then and there, we do get vexed, feel thwarted, and fall into aversion. We might even say, "I hate stubbing my toe." Right then and there, we make it into a something, a problem, usually my problem, and then the problem needs a solution. If we're not careful, the solution can be far worse than the problem. Second, wisdom is suggesting that the place to apply the remedy is at the point of contact, in the very moment of contact. We guard against stubbed toes by wearing protection on our feet, not by covering over the whole world out of our ignorance, desire, fear, or anger. Similarly, we can guard against the elaborate cascade of often vexing and enthralling thoughts and emotions commonly triggered by even one bare sense impression. We can do so by bringing our attention to the point of contact, in the moment of contact with the sense impression itself. In this way, when there is seeing, the eyes are momentarily in contact with the bare actuality of what is seen. In the next moment, all sorts of thoughts and feelings pour in. I know what that is. Isn't it lovely? I don't like it as much as I like that other one. I wish it would stay this way. I wish it would go away. Why is it here to annoy, thwart, frustrate me in this moment? And on and on and on. The object or situation is just what it is. Can we see it with open, bare attention in the very moment of seeing, and then bring our awareness to see the triggering of the cascade of thoughts and feelings, liking and disliking, judging, wishing, remembering, hoping, fearing, and panicking that follow from the original contact, like night follows day? If we are able, even for one moment, to simply rest in the seeing of what is here to be seen, and vigilantly apply mindfulness right in the moment of contact, we can become alerted to the cascade of thoughts and reactions as it begins, unleashed by the experience of its either being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and choose not to be caught up in it, whatever its characteristics. Instead, we can allow it to just unfold as it is, without pursuit if it is pleasant, or rejection if it is unpleasant. In that very moment, the vexations actually can be seen to dissolve, because they are simply recognized as mental phenomena arising in the mind. Applying mindfulness in the moment of contact, at the point of contact, we can rest in the openness of pure seeing without getting so caught up in our highly conditioned, reactive, and habitual thinking, or in a stream of disturbance in the feeling realm, which of course only leads to more disturbance and turbulence of mind, and carries us away from any chance of appreciating the bare actuality of what is, or for that matter, of responding to it in an effective and authentic way. Mindfulness thus serves as our shoes, protecting us from the consequences of our own habits of emotional reaction, forgetfulness, and unconscious harming that stem from not recognizing, remembering, and inhabiting the deeper nature of our own being in the moment in which a sense impression, any sense impression, arises. With mindfulness applied in that moment and in that way, at the point of contact, in the arising itself, the nature of our seeing, the miracle of our seeing, is free to be what it is, and the mind's essential nature is not disturbed. For that moment, we are free from harm, free from all conceptualizing, and from all vestiges of clinging. We are merely resting in the knowing of what is seen, heard, smelled, tasted, felt, or thought, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Stringing moments of mindfulness together in this way allows us to gradually rest more and more in a non-conceptual, a more non-reactive, a more choiceless awareness, to actually be the knowing that awareness already is, to be its spaciousness, its freedom. Not bad for a pair of cheap shoes. Actually, they're not so cheap. They are priceless. Also, invaluable. They cannot even be bought, only crafted out of our pain and our wisdom. They wind up, in T.S. Eliot's words, costing not less than everything. Meditation. It's not what you think. It might be good to clarify a few common misunderstandings about meditation right off the bat. First, meditation is best thought of as a way of being rather than a technique or a collection of techniques. I'll say it again. Meditation is a way of being, not a technique. This doesn't mean that there aren't methods and techniques associated with meditation practice. There are. In fact, there are hundreds of them, and we will be making good use of some of them. But without understanding that all techniques are orienting vehicles pointing at ways of being in relationship to the present moment and to one's own mind and one's own experience, we can easily get lost in techniques and in our misguided but entirely understandable attempts to use them to get somewhere else and experience some special result or state that we think is the goal of it all. As we shall see, such an orientation can seriously impede our understanding of the full richness of meditation practice and what it offers us. So it is helpful to just keep in mind that above all, meditation is a way of being, or you could say a way of seeing, a way of knowing, even a way of loving. Second, meditation is not relaxation spelled differently. Perhaps I should say that again as well. Meditation is not relaxation spelled differently. That doesn't mean that meditation is not frequently accompanied by profound relaxation and by deep feelings of well-being. Of course it is, or can be sometimes. But mindfulness meditation is the embrace of any and all mind states in awareness without preferring one to another. From the point of view of mindfulness practice, pain or anguish, or for that matter, boredom, or impatience, or frustration, or anxiety, or tension in the body, are all equally valid objects of our attention if we find them arising in the present moment, each a rich opportunity for insight and learning, and potentially for liberation, rather than signs that our meditation practice is not succeeding because we are not feeling relaxed or experiencing calmness or bliss in some moment. We might say that meditation is really a way of being appropriately in tune with the circumstances one finds oneself in any and every moment. If we are caught up in the preoccupations of our own mind, in that moment we cannot be present in an appropriate way, or perhaps at all. We will bring an agenda of some kind to whatever we say or do or think, even if we don't know it. This doesn't mean that there won't be various things going on in our minds, many of them chaotic, turbulent, painful, and confusing, if we start training to become more mindful. It's only natural that there will be. That is the nature of the mind and of our lives at times. But we do not have to be caught by those things or so caught up in them that they color our capacity to perceive the full extent of what is going on and what is called for, or color our capacity to perceive that we have no idea what is really going on or what might be called for. It is the non-clinging and therefore the clear perceiving and the willingness to act appropriately within whatever circumstances are arising that constitute this way of being that we are calling meditation. It's not uncommon for people who know little of meditation except what they've gleaned from the media to harbor the notion that meditation is basically a willful inward manipulation akin to throwing a switch in your brain that results in your mind going completely blank. No more thought, no more worry. You are catapulted into the meditative state, which is always one of deep relaxation, peace, calm, and insight, often associated with concepts of nirvana in the public's mind. This notion is a serious, if totally understandable, misperception. Meditation practice can be fraught with thought and worry and desire and every other mental state and affliction known to frequent human beings. It is not the content of your experience that is important. What is important is our ability to be aware of that content and even more of the factors that drive its unfolding and the ways in which those factors either liberate us or imprison us moment by moment and year in, year out. So just to be clear about it, there is no one mindful state that we are aiming to achieve or attain. Any condition or state we find ourselves in any moment, including anger or fear or sadness, can be held in awareness and thus be seen, met, known, and accepted as part of the actuality of that moment. While there is no question that meditation can lead to deep relaxation, peace, calm, insight, wisdom, and compassion, and that the term nirvana actually refers to an important and verifiable dimension of human experience, and is not merely the name of an aftershave lotion or a fancy yacht, it is never what one thinks, and what one thinks is never the whole story. That is one of the mysteries and attractions of meditation. Yet sometimes, even seasoned meditators forget that meditation is not about trying to get anywhere special, and can long for or strive for a certain result that will fulfill our desires and expectations. Even when we know better, it can still come up at times, and we have to remind ourselves in those moments to let go of such concepts and desires, to treat them just like any other thoughts arising in the mind, to remember to cling to nothing, and maybe even to see that they are intrinsically empty, mere fabrications, however understandable, of what we might call the wanting mind. Another misconception is that meditation is a certain way of controlling one's thoughts or having specific thoughts. Well, this notion too has a degree of truth to it, in that there are specific forms of discursive meditation that are aimed at cultivating specific qualities of being, such as loving kindness and equanimity, and positive emotions such as joy and compassion. Our ways of thinking about meditation often make practicing more difficult than it needs to be, and prevent us from coming to our experience of the present moment as it actually is, rather than the way we might want it to be, and with an open heart and an open mind. For meditation, and especially mindfulness meditation, is not the throwing of a switch and catapulting yourself anywhere, nor is it entertaining certain thoughts and getting rid of others, nor is it making your mind blank or willing yourself to be peaceful or relaxed. It is really an inward gesture that inclines the heart and mind, seen as one seamless whole, towards a full spectrum awareness of the present moment just as it is, accepting whatever is happening simply because it's already happening, and not taking any of it personally or noticing how personally you are taking it, and letting even that realization be held in awareness. This inner orientation is sometimes referred to in psychotherapy as radical acceptance. Whatever we call it, adopting this relationship to experience is hard work, very hard work, especially when what is happening does not conform to our expectations, desires, and fantasies. And our expectations, desires, and fantasies are all pervasive and seemingly endless. They can color everything, sometimes in very subtle ways that are not at all obvious, especially when they are about meditation practice and issues of progress and attainment. So meditation is not about trying to get anywhere else. It is about allowing yourself to be exactly where you are and as you are, and for the world to be exactly as it is in this moment as well. This is not so easy, since there is always something that we can rightly find fault with if we stay inside the echo chamber of our thinking. And so there tends to be great resistance on the part of the mind and body to settle into things just as they are, even for a moment. That resistance to what is may be even more compounded if we are meditating because we hope that by doing so we can effect change, make things different, improve our own lives, and contribute to improving the lot of the world. That doesn't mean that your aspirations to effect positive change, make things different, improve your life and the lot of the world are inappropriate. Those are all very real possibilities. Just by meditating, by sitting down and being still, you can change yourself and the world. In fact, just by sitting down and being still in a small but not insignificant way, you already have. But the paradox is that you can only change yourself or the world if you get out of your own way for a moment and give yourself over and trust in allowing things to be as they already are, without pursuing anything, especially goals that are products of your thinking. Einstein put it quite cogently: the problems that exist in the world today cannot be solved by the level of thinking that created them. Implication: we need to develop and refine our mind and its capacities for seeing and for knowing, for recognizing and transcending whatever motives and concepts and habits of unawareness may have generated or compounded the difficulties we find ourselves embroiled in, a mind that knows and sees in new ways, that is motivated differently. This is the same as saying we need to return to our original, untouched and unconditioned mind. How can we do this? Precisely by taking a moment to get out of our own way, to get outside of the stream of thought and sit by the bank and rest for a while in things as they are, underneath our thinking, or as Sansanim liked to say, before thinking. That means being with what is for a moment and trusting what is deepest and best in yourself, even if it doesn't make any sense to your thinking mind. Since you are far more than the sum of your thoughts and ideas and opinions, including your thoughts of who you are and of the world and the stories and explanations you tell yourself about all that, dropping in on the bare experience of the present moment is actually dropping in on just the qualities you may be hoping to cultivate, because they all come out of awareness, and it is awareness that we fall into when we stop trying to get somewhere or have a special feeling, and instead allow ourselves to be where we are and with whatever we are feeling right now. Awareness itself is the teacher, the student, and the lesson. So from the point of view of awareness, any state of mind is a meditative state. Anger or sadness is just as interesting and useful and valid to look into as enthusiasm or delight, and far more valuable than a blank mind, a mind that is insensate, out of touch. Anger, fear, terror, sadness, resentment, impatience, enthusiasm, delight, confusion, disgust, contempt, envy, rage, lust, even dullness, doubt, and torpor. In fact, all mind states and body states are occasions to know ourselves better if we can stop, look, and listen. In other words, if we can come to our senses and be intimate with what presents itself in awareness in any and every moment. The astonishing thing, so counterintuitive, is that nothing else needs to happen. We can give up trying to make something special occur. In letting go of wanting something special to occur, maybe we can realize that something very special is already occurring and is always occurring, namely life emerging in each moment as awareness itself. 2 ways to think about meditation: the instrumental and the non-instrumental. Having said that meditation is not a technique or set of techniques to achieve a particular state, but rather a way of being, it may be useful to realize that there are 2 apparently contradictory ways to think about meditation and what it is all about, and the mix is different for different teachers and in different traditions. You may find me purposefully using the language of both these ways simultaneously, because both are equally true and important, and the tension between them exceedingly creative and useful. One approach is to think of meditation as instrumental, as a method, a discipline that allows us to cultivate, refine, and deepen our capacity to pay attention and to dwell in present moment awareness. The more we practice the method, which could actually be a number of different methods, the more likely we are over time to develop greater stability in our ability to attend to any object or event that arises in the field of awareness, either inwardly or outwardly. This stability can be experienced in the body as well as in the mind, and is often accompanied by an increasing vividness of perception and a calmness in the observing itself. Out of such systematic practice, moments of clarity and insight into the nature of things, including ourselves, tend to arise naturally. In this way of looking at meditation, it is progressive. There is a vector to it that aims towards wisdom, compassion, and clarity, a trajectory that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, although the process can hardly be said to be linear and sometimes feels like it consists of 1 step forward and 6 steps back. In this regard, it is not dissimilar to any other competency that we may develop by working at, and there are instructions and teachings to guide you all along the way. This way of looking at meditation is necessary, important, and valid. But, and it is a very big but, even though the Buddha himself worked hard at meditating for 6 years and broke through to an extraordinary realization of freedom, clarity, and understanding, this method-based way of describing the process is not in itself complete and can, by itself, give an erroneous impression of what meditation actually involves. Just as physicists have been compelled by the results of their experiments and calculations to describe the nature of elementary particles in 2 complementary ways, one as particles, the other as waves, even though they are really one thing, but here language fails because at that level they are not really things, but rather more like properties of energy and space at the core of all things at unthinkably minute levels. With meditation, there is a second, equally valid way to describe it, a description that is critical to a complete understanding of what meditation really is when we come to practice it. This other way of describing meditation is that whatever meditation is, it is not instrumental at all. If it is a method, it is the method of no method. It is not a doing. There is no going anywhere, nothing to practice, no beginning, middle, or end, no attainment, and nothing to attain. Rather, it is the direct realization and embodiment in this very moment of who you already are, outside of time and space and concepts of any kind, resting in the very nature of your being, in what is sometimes called the natural state, original mind, pure awareness, no mind, or simply emptiness. You are already everything you may hope to attain, so no effort of the will is necessary, even for the mind to come back to the breath, and no attainment is possible. You are already it. It is already here. Here is already everywhere, and now is already always. There is no time, no space, no body, no mind, to paraphrase the great Indian 15th century Sufi poet Kabir. And there is no purpose to meditation. It is the one human activity, non-activity really, that we engage in for its own sake, for no purpose other than to be awake to what is actually so. For example, how can you possibly attain your foot when it's not apart from you in the first place? We would never think to attain our foot because it's already here. The thinking mind makes it into a foot, a thing, but unless it is severed from the body, it's not a separate entity with its own intrinsic existence. It is simply the end of the leg, adapted for standing and walking upright. When we are thinking, it's a foot, but when we are in awareness, outside, underneath, and beyond thinking, it's simply what it is, and you already have it, or put differently, it is not other than you and never was. Same for your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and every other part of your body. As St. Francis put it, what you are looking for is who is looking. By the same token, how can you possibly attain sentience, knowing, original mind, when original mind, to paraphrase Ken Wilber, is reading these words? How can you come to your senses when your senses are already fully operative? Your ears already hear, your eyes already see, your body already feels. It's only when we turn them into concepts that we de facto sever them from the body of our being, which by its very nature is undivided, already whole, already complete, already sentient, already awake. These two ways of understanding what meditation is are complementary and paradoxical, just as are the wave and particle nature of matter at the quantum level and below. That means that neither is complete by itself. Alone, neither is completely true. Together, they both become true. For this reason, both descriptions are important to know of and keep in mind from the very beginning of taking up the practice of meditation, and especially mindfulness meditation. That way we are less likely to get caught on the horns of dualistic thinking, either striving too hard to attain what we already are, or claiming to already be what we have not in actuality tasted and realized, and have no way of drawing on, even though technically speaking it may be true and we are already it. It is not merely that we have the potential to become it, although relatively speaking from the instrumental perspective that is the case. We are it, but we don't know it. It may be right under our noses, closer than close, but it remains hidden all the same. These two descriptions inform each other. When we hold them both, even merely conceptually at first, then the effort we make at sitting, or in the body scan, or the yoga, or in bringing mindfulness into all aspects of our lives, will be the right kind of effort, and we will have the right kind of attitude because we will remember that actually, in terms of the fundamental nature of life and mind, there is no place to go and no striving is necessary. In fact, striving can rapidly become counterproductive. Keeping this in mind, we will be more inclined to remember to be kind and gentle with ourselves, relaxed and accepting, and clear even in the face of turmoil in the mind or in the world. We will be less inclined to idealize our practice or get lost in gaining fantasies of where it will take us if we quote-unquote do it right. We will be less entrained into the contortions of our own reactivity, more likely to let go into and be able to rest effortlessly in non-doing, in non-striving, in our original beginner's mind. In other words, in awareness itself, without an agenda other than to be awake to what is. This inhabiting of awareness with things exactly as they are is orthogonal to any kind of instructional set we may be from the instrumental perspective, and rightly so, whispering in our own ear. From the relative and temporal perspective, what the Buddha called right, meaning wise effort, is absolutely required, and we will learn that lesson and know it firsthand as we come to practice over days, weeks, months, years, and decades. For there is no question that we do get lost in the perpetual agitations of body and mind. There is no question that when we sit down to meditate, we so often find that our attention span is short-lived and hard to sustain, and our awareness more often than not clouded over, and the mind less than luminous and clear, objects of attention less than vivid, regardless of any self-talk about the mind's natural state and luminous empty nature. So it is crucial that we remind ourselves to stay seated rather than jump up as soon as the mind becomes bored or agitated. To come back to the breath, for instance, or to let go of a chain of thoughts that has carried us away, and to settle once again and always in awareness itself. For all of these, and ultimately whatever emerges in this present moment, become the real curriculum of the moment, the real curriculum of mindfulness and of life itself. After living with these two descriptions of meditation for a time, the instrumental and the non-instrumental, you will find that they slowly become comfortable old friends and allies. Practice gradually, or sometimes even suddenly, transcends all ideas of practice and effort, and whatever effort we put in is no longer effort at all, but really love. Our efforts become the embodiment of self-knowing, and thus of wisdom. But it is also no big deal. We are it more than we do it, because there's no more substantial difference between us and awareness than there is between us and our foot. We are never without it. And yet, the foot of a Mikhail Baryshnikov or a Martha Graham in their prime is not quite the same as that of us regular folk. Their feet know something ours may not, although in their very nature they are the same. We can marvel at that sameness and that difference. We can love it, and we can be it too, because in essence, we already are.